Well, hello everyone. This is Mitchell Moat, an extension agent with the University of Tennessee and Tennessee State University Extension Program here in Rutherford County. And I'm coming to you today bringing you this little talk entitled Lawn and Garden Tool Care for Ladies, or really and truly for anyone else. So why are we having a talk like this? This presentation is in direct response to a request that was made by a female citizen here in the county during one of our weekly lawn and garden radio shows on WGNS radio back a few months ago. We were discussing something I think had to do with pruning, and the aspect of that conversation was it was always better to use sharp pruning shears when making those pruning cuts because they tended to heal better. Cuts made with a sharp pruner tended to heal better than cuts made with a dull pruner. And so it was a good idea to make sure that those pruners were sharpened and good maintenance and so on before going out and doing some of those pruning practices. Well, and then the lady went on to say, well, can you sharpen those things? And the answer was, well, sure you can. So, well, I don't know how. Why don't you folks have a class that would help teach some folks that don't know how to do that, how to do that? So that's where this came from. And initially, the original intent was for this to be a live presentation in person as part of the Farmers Market Educational Series. But because of the health situation, the disease pandemic that we're under right now, things have changed and we're not going to be able to do that, but we're going to bring you this presentation anyway. So for the next few minutes, we're going to spend time on this topic of lawn and landscape tool care for ladies. I would point out that the use of any product name or any image throughout this presentation is strictly for the sake of example, and their use should not be viewed as a recommendation for nor a condemnation of that product. So, ladies, women certainly do use an awful lot of lawn and garden tools. They use them and they can certainly maintain them just as well as anyone else can. What it amounts to, though, is just having a little bit of knowledge and a few basic tools and learning how to do it yourself. What do we do with these lawn and garden tools? What's the primary task that we use them for? Well, one of the major tasks that we use these tools for is for cutting. We use them for things like cutting the grass. When we mow the grass, what are we doing? We're cutting the grass. We use them to make pruning cuts on shrubs and trees and so on. We use these tools to cut the tops and the roots from weeds and other unwanted plants. We use them to cut through the soil while we're cultivating the soil in the vegetable garden or in the landscape bed and so on. So we use them a lot for cutting because so many of the practices that we use these tools for do revolve around cutting. What we're going to focus on today is keeping some of these cutting tools cutting well. Now, let's talk about keeping the lawnmower cutting well first of all, I guess. So the first thing to keep in mind is if the lawnmower won't start, it's not going to cut. And there are things that anybody can do, female, male, otherwise, any operator can do to help ensure that that lawnmower is going to start more reliably than other times. The first thing I would suggest is read that owner's manual. Every one of these lawnmowers or other pieces of outdoor power equipment will come with an owner's manual. And it's similar to the owner's manual of a car. It's not as big, it's not as much detail, not as long, but the information that's found in there is essential for learning how to maintain and to use the equipment. It's going to tell you how to start the machine. It will tell you how to stop the machine. It will tell you how to adjust the machine. For example, a lawnmower, how to adjust the mowing height up or down to make it leave the grass cut longer or make it cut shorter. It will tell you about the oil, the kind of oil that's used in the lawnmower. How much does it take? How do you check the oil? Where do you check the oil? The kind of fuel to use, so on and so on. So it's important to read and to understand the operator's manual and refer back to it because it will help you keep the piece of equipment, regardless of what it is, in good operating condition. So that's the first thing. Pay attention to the owner's manual and use it. Don't just set it up in a folder somewhere or in a bookcase and forget where it is because you are going to need it if you're going to maintain a piece of outdoor power equipment like a power lawnmower. Now, it takes three things in order for one of those engines in a piece of outdoor power equipment like a lawnmower to run. It's got to have fuel, and that fuel has to be combined with some air to create a fuel-air mixture, and then there has to be a spark of some sort to ignite that fuel-air mixture and cause an explosion. If those three things are present at the right time and in the right mixture, an engine is going to run. If the engine will run, the lawnmower has a lot better chance of cutting. So the first step is to use fresh gasoline. Fresh gasoline gasoline, the hydrocarbons in a fresh gas, in the fresh container of gasoline, have not. Let me back up. What happens when gasoline is stored for a while? You know, there are hydrocarbons in there. That's the explosive part of the gasoline. Well, those lighter, more explosive ones tend to evaporate off, if you will, or leave after a period of time. So gasoline that's been stored for a long time may not ignite quite as readily as fresh gasoline would. So if you buy gasoline in a larger container that is going to sit out in the shed for a month or longer before it's used up, and you buy another can of gas, it's probably a good idea to use a fuel stabilizing product like the one you see pictured here, in that mix it in with the gasoline every time you fill up that can, to help keep that gas fresh, or help keep it stable, and to not lose those lighter, more combustible hydrocarbons as it sits out there in the shed waiting for you to come use it. It's also a perfectly fine thing to put it in, even if you do use a small container of gasoline that you're not going to store for more than 30 days. There's absolutely nothing wrong, just to be on the safe side, with adding the fuel stabilizer every time you fill up a fresh can of gasoline. And it's also a good idea to add fuel stabilizer to the gas tank of the lawnmower itself if you're going to store it over the winter with gasoline in it. That will help to maybe cut down on incidences of being hard to start next spring when the mowing season begins and you're ready to get out there and get after it. So the first thing is use good fresh gasoline. And if you're going to store gasoline for any length of time before you use it, it might be a wise thing to add some fuel stabilizer to it to help minimize hard starts because of older gasoline. You know, the second thing is all these little gasoline engines have lots of moving parts, and they turn at a high rate, at a high volume, high RPMs, revolutions per minute. So there's lots of moving parts in there. Moving parts need to be lubricated. You know, your owner's manual is going to tell you about the kind of oil that you add to the engine, which provides a lubrication as those parts move back and forth against one another to reduce the amount of wear and tear on those parts. And it's important that you check the oil. You know, the lady here in this slide, she's checking the oil. It's just a conventional dipstick, kind of like what you'd find in an automobile on this little walk-behind lawnmower here. But the manual will tell you how to do that if you've not done it before, and it will also tell you how to read the dipstick itself. And the dipstick has directions on it, how to read it, whether the oil level is low, whether it's excessive, whether it's high, if you need to add any more oil, etc. It also tells you how much oil or what kind of oil that you would add if extra oil is needed in there. It also tells you how frequently to change the oil, because that oil will need to be changed after some period of time, just because it will get dirty. It will collect some wear parts, some metal fragments in there, just the normal part of the wear process. And there's bound to be some dirt and dust that gets trapped inside the engine, is brought in through the intake, and it can be collected in the oil. So over time it gets dirty, and it will need to be changed in order to keep the lawnmower running as it should, and to extend its life and reduce the amount of wear. You see a little brush laying there on top of the pull start, the recoil starter mechanism on this lawnmower, and that little brush was used in this case to help remove some dirt and debris from around the oil dipstick cap, as well as the gas filter cap that you see pointed out here with the yellow arrow. It's a good idea to use a brush or something to remove that debris, so that when you pull that cap off, you're not going to have as much loose debris laying around the open hole, that might be inadvertently knocked down into that fuel tank or down into the oil sump, which could cause, you know, contamination and just add dirt into the engine itself. So that's an important thing to do. You keep fresh gasoline in the engine, use a gas stabilizer to keep it fresh, and to make sure that the oil level is where it is supposed to be, to ensure that the engine is lubricated to reduce wear when it's running. And the third thing that I mentioned that an engine has to have in order to run, in order for combustion to take place, it's got to have air mixed in with the fuel. Well, every one of these little motors has an air filter of some kind. You know, you see the air filter on this little lawnmower pictured right here. It's a cartridge type filter, and you'll notice it has a gray foam piece on the outside of it. Well, this gray foam piece is called a pre-cleaner or a pre-filter, and it can be removed. It's elastic. It can be taken off, and And very often the directions will tell you from your owner's manual to wash that with the soap and water to remove accumulated dirt and debris that is pulled in through the air intake and captured on this filter to keep it from going in through the carburetor and getting mixed into the engine itself. So this is the first line of cleanliness, I guess, defense against debris entering the motor. So cleaning this pre-filter, a pre-cleaner as directed can be a good step in maintaining good airflow coming into the engine, because if you don't have good airflow, then good combustion doesn't take place, the engine doesn't run as efficiently, and it can increase the wear level on the motor itself. So when you pull this little filter off, this pre-filter off, you'll notice that the primary filter is very similar to what you'll find in an automobile underneath that. It's typically going to be made of a pleated paper of some sort. Very often the directions in the owner's manual will tell you to not use high pressure air to blow that to blow the trash, the dirt, and the debris out of the filter, because high pressure air could damage the filter itself, but instead to take and knock that filter gently against some object to help dislodge and remove accumulated dirt that can be trapped inside the folds or the pleats of that air cleaner, that air filter. And they're not hard to replace. They're simple, you know, they're easy to get to. It doesn't take any special tools, usually just a wing nut or something like that to remove the cover. The little filter pops right out. If it's excessively dirty, you know, just you can buy a new and replace it. Most anybody can do that. Anybody can. So those are the three primary things, you know, to help keep the motor running good and in good shape. Use good fresh gasoline, keep it fresh by using a fuel stabilizer, maintain the correct oil level inside the motor to ensure lubrication, and make sure that it can breathe, but that it can pull in enough air to provide proper combustion through the air filter, through the cleaner itself. So those are things to do to keep the motor running, because if it's not running, it won't cut. Now, the third thing that I'd mentioned earlier was a spark plug, or no, I didn't mention the spark plug. I said it's got to have spark. Well, the spark to ignite the fuel oil mixture is provided by the spark plug, and you'll see a typical small engine spark plug pictured here in this slide. Spark plugs, they're not a lot of moving, they don't have any moving parts on them, okay? It provides the spark out of the electrode end down here. If you can see the mouse on the screen, this is the electrode end that goes into the piston where the gas and the air mixture is compressed. And then when it sparks, this spark comes out of the electrode portion down here, ignites that mixture. So there's not moving parts on there. They don't wear out very rapidly. And so for that reason, because in my experience, I've not seen much in the way of failure on small engine spark plugs and so on. So we're not really going to discuss maintaining the spark plugs at this time, but I will point out that they can be changed, and sometimes they do need to be changed, but typically they're not the first thing to go bad. And that would not be the first thing I'd think about if I had a lawnmower that's hard to start, but it could be that. But we're not going to get into detail and discuss maintenance on spark plugs during this talk. Now, once you get the lawnmower going and keeping it running, then the whole purpose is to cut the grass. Well, a sharp mower blade cuts grass more cleanly and more efficiently than does a dull mower blade. You can see these grass blades pictured here in this slide. You got blade A, blade B, blade C, and blade D. Blade A was cut with a good sharp mower blade. It has the least amount of damage. It's got a clean, sharp, straight edge cut there across it. Blade B, you know, it's not terribly bad, but it does show this odd spot right there near the, you know, a portion of the way down from the tip. You see the brown discolored area. That wasn't cut cleanly. The blade bent the mower blade bent the grass blade over and didn't cut it off very cleanly initially. So that's not a super clean cut. And when we get down here to C and to D, we can see a lot more shredding taking place, not such a clean cut. That shredding cut action, you know, basically you're beating the grass into submission. You know, you're beating the ends of the grass blades off. You're not really cutting them so much. And that creates more damaged surface area. More damaged surface area allows more air for water to leave the plant. So it will dry out and leave dark brown ends that can cause a discolored appearance over the entire lawn. If all the grass tip ends are brown like that because of having a dull cut, they're ragged. You've got, since, as I said, it makes a bigger, exposes more surface area, that cut does when it's ragged like that. And so it's a bigger area there, a bigger opening for potential disease pathogens to enter into it. And it just makes the grass look ugly, and it's not good for it. So you have to have a sharp mower blade, provide a good clean cut. So you're going to have to take the mower blade off to sharpen it. Now, the young lady here in this photograph is holding up two tools that can be very useful in removing a mower blade. The one that you see there in her left hand, this kind of got a T screw handle on it and a kind of a bracket there. That thing is a mower blade lock. And what it does, you'll see in just a minute, it fits up against the underside of the mower deck itself and locks that blade in place so that when you are removing the blade, it's not going to turn. You don't have to worry about trying to hold it with your hand and maybe cut yourself or get yourself pinched or mash some fingers by doing that, because you just tighten that down and it holds it in place for you. It's well worth the investment. It's not an incredibly expensive tool, and it can sure cut down on some of the headaches of trying to remove a mower blade to get it off and sharpen it. And then the tool that you see there in the right hand is a long handle ratchet. A long handle ratchet is a good tool to use because it will give you added leverage to remove the bolts that hold the bolts that hold the mower blade on. And sometimes those things are put back on there pretty tight. They should be put pretty tight because that's all that's holding that spinning blade on there. And you got to figure those blades may be spinning at in excess, in speeds of excess of 3,600 revolutions per minute. So you want them on there pretty tight, but they can also be aggravating to remove, to do maintenance on them when they're put on there really tight. So a long handle ratchet, handle bar like this one will help provide that leverage, but not everybody has one of those. Another option then is to use a short handle ratchet, but then use something called a cheater bar, which is just a piece of pipe, just straight pipe that's of a diameter that will slide over the end of your ratchet. That'll give you a longer handle, and thus you'll have a better mechanical advantage, and makes it easier for anyone to remove those tight bolts that are holding the blade on there. So let's kind of see this thing in action. Oh, you will need a socket, or you can use other tools. You can use open end wrenches as well, but a ratchet and socket combination are a good tool combination. They're very efficient at removing things like the bolts that hold mower blades on underneath the mower deck and so on. So you turn the lawnmower up on its edge, and it's important, I think, to keep in mind that you turn it with the gas tank up. So you could turn this more either the left side or the right side. So in this case, the lawnmower is turned over onto its left side. And if we were looking at the engine itself, we would see that the gas tank is up on the mower, not down on the mower. We want to turn it up so that the gas tank is to the top of the engine, not down on the bottom, closest to the ground. So you can see the mower's turned over. Here's the blade lock I was talking about. There it is in place. You can see my mouse arrow moving over it right here. It just bolts on to the side of the mower deck itself, and that bracket the blade fits inside the bracket. And then when you turn the bolts that hold the mower blade on, you can see the ratchet here, the socket is attached to the blade. This blade has two bolts. The socket is attached to the blade or the bolt there on the lower side, closer to the ground. And then that cheater handle is slid down over that to give a long handle and give good mechanical advantage to allow this young lady to remove those bolts holding the mower blade on. So when you get those off, then the whole idea is to sharpen those. If you've never looked closely at a rotary mower blade, here's a good example of what they look like. The cutting edges of these blades are on just either end. The middle of the blade is not sharp at all. It's just cuts out on the ends. And you can see the arrows pointing to the cutting, the sharpened cutting areas on either end of this mower blade. Well, those ends are the areas where you're going to be sharpening the blade. And you've got the blade, we set it up here in a vise. You know, a vise is a tool that you can use it to clamp it down and hold it steady while you're sharpening on it. You can see that the edges that are sharpened are beveled, or they have a slope or an angle to them. When you sharpen that mower blade or any other tool that's got a beveled edge on it, you want to maintain that original bevel. You don't want to change the angle and make it vastly different than it was before you put it in the vise and started sharpening. But the whole idea is to try to maintain that same angle while you're sharpening it. You can do it with either a file, as you see here in this example. This young lady's using a file to sharpen the blade. She's got it clamped in the vise, and she's got the file set at an angle so that it mimics or that it reflects the same beveled angle, the beveled edge that the mower blade has. And so she files across the length of that cutting section to remove nicks and irregularities in the blade and to restore some sharpness back to it. You could also use a powered grinder to do the same thing. If you're going to use a powered grinder, you're certainly going to put the mower blade in a vise to start with, and you're also going to want to use gloves and safety glasses. It's a good idea to use gloves and safety glasses anyway, but if you're using a powered grinder like that, you definitely want to do that just so you can keep the metal sparks, debris out of your eyes, and also to protect your hands. But so you sharpen the blade, you do that on either end of it. The idea is not to get a razor sharp blade because they'll typically dull much faster, but you just want a functional sharpness. So you've got all the nicks and the bad spots filed out or ground out of the blade as much as possible. And it's important that the blade be balanced because this thing is sitting on the end of the crankshaft of that lawnmower, and it's spinning around and around. And if one end of that blade where you remove metal, if you remove more metal off one end than the other, then one end may be heavier than the other. So that sets up a vibration as the blade rotates around, and it can cause that vibration to transfer up through the crankshaft of the mower and cause it to wear out seals in the mower, cause it to wear out faster, and typically cause mower failure much sooner than would have occurred otherwise because of spinning while it's unbalanced. You could use a tool that you see pictured here. This is just called a little cone blade balancer. It's called a cone blade balancer because it's in the shape of a little cone. It's made of plastic. You can pick one of these up at a lawnmower shop or places that sell parts for lawnmowers. It's a handy little tool, and the way it works is you can see pictured here. You just set the blade over the cone, and if you have done a good job of removing roughly the same amount of metal off of either end of the mower blade, then it's going to balance. If one end were heavier than the other, it would lean closer towards your bench. And so then you would know, okay, this end is heavier. I need to take a little more metal off of it. I need to sharpen it a little bit more to help balance it up. In a pinch, if you don't have one of those, you can drive a nail up into the 2x4 there on your shed and hang the mower blade on that nail. And it's going to do the same sort of thing. The idea is if it balances without dropping much to the left or to the right, then you've probably got it sharp, or you have removed equal amounts off. You don't have one end of the blade heavier than the other. If it wants to consistently drop to one side, that tells you that that blade is heavier on that end, and you might need to file it off a little bit more, grind it a little bit more to take some of that metal off to get it back in balance again. So we got the blade sharpened, but also underneath that mower deck, you can see it's going to accumulate grass clippings under there. Now, from a cut standpoint, I think that makes a difference because this rotary mower blade, there's nothing holding that grass blade up for it to cut, unless it gets a little lift created by the whirling action, the spinning action of that blade underneath there, the air moving underneath the deck and so on, then there's nothing to hold that blade up to allow that mower to cut it off. There's nothing to hold the grass blade up to allow the lawnmower blade to cut it off, unless it does have that bit of lift. If you've got all of that space or a lot of that space under the deck that has been crowded up and it's all gunked up in there with stuck grass clippings, then the airflow will not be the same, and it may not have the same degree of lift that it would have had otherwise, and so that may influence cut quality. And plus, it's a good idea to clean the underside of the deck. If you've got a steel deck, those grass clippings got a lot of moisture in them. It'll help retain moisture in there and will cause those decks to rust out faster. Even if it's an aluminum deck that won't rust, it can still cause pitting. That moisture can over time, and some of the acid or just some of the compounds in the grasses can cause some pitting in that metal. So it's just a good idea to use something. This lady here in this photograph is using a paint scraper to remove some of the grass clippings from underneath the deck. It's a good idea to do that after every use to help keep that deck clean underneath and keep the mower cutting and running like it should. So lawnmowers, those are a cutting tool. We use those a lot, but they're by far not the only cutting tools. Lots of hand tools are used. In this photograph, you see a pair of hand hedge clippers. Any tool that has a beveled edge on it can be sharpened, and its performance improved by the use of a file or a hand grinder. In this photograph, the young lady has the clippers locked down in the vise, and again, she's using the file to file down the length of the hedge clipper blade. She's going to do it much like she did on the lawnmower. She's going to file down the length of it. She's going to take out any nicks, irregularities there, and get it nice and shiny again to help improve its cutting action. Typically these will only have one sharp edge to them, and so that's the edge that you will sharpen. You don't worry about balancing on these because they're not going to be spinning at a high rate of speed. You're only going to be opening and closing them at the rate however fast you open and close them yourself. So that's how fast they operate. So balance is not going to be a big issue on that. But that would be an appropriate way to sharpen a set of hedge clippers like this. Hoe blades that you use for cultivation and all sorts of gardening activities over time will get dull. You can see we're looking at the flat side or the back side of this, the face of the blade of this hoe, and you'll see how the cutting edge over time has been rolled backwards. Okay, that'll happen from especially when it strikes a lot of hard objects like rocks and so on, and rocky soil, stony soil, because that sharpened edge is thinner along the cutting edge there, and over time it can be rolled backwards a little bit. So that might be the first thing to address when you start to sharpen that. But maybe before you sharpen it, it's a good idea to clean the cutting face, the metal part of those cutting tools, whether hoes or shovels or axes or hedge clippers or whatever, because by removing that accumulated dirt, it can help to slow down the development of rust, and rust can be one of the things that will help to shorten the life of these tools. So you can use something like a wire brush like she's using here, just a hand-powered wire brush to help remove that accumulated dirt, or you could even use a power drill. This is a cordless drill that has a wire brush attached to it. So she set the hoe over in a vise, is holding it there in the vise, and then using the power drill with a brush attachment to remove that dirt. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's just a good idea to keep those metal surfaces, and even the handles themselves too, but especially the metal surfaces clean, relatively clean and free from accumulated dirt, just so that you'll minimize the amount of rusting that takes place over time. Now, once you've got them pretty clean, now she's going in to start to sharpen this hoe blade. We're looking at again, this is the back of the blade itself. Okay, this is the cutting edge is here on the underside, is closest to the bench itself. So this is the flat part back here. This is the part that's not really sharpened so much, but this is the back edge of the flat part. And you can see we showed previously how this cutting edge has been kind of rolled over a little bit. So what she's doing is taking that file and just flattening that out again. She's smoothing that rolled edge out, and then when you get through, it'll look something like that. But you took some of those irregularities out of it and got it shaped back up nice and flat like it should have been in the first place. So now at this point, she's ready to turn it over, and now you can see the beveled edge there on that hoe. Okay, she's going to sharpen it just like she's sharpened the lawnmower blade, just like she's sharpened the blade on the hedge clipper, by using the file, keeping it set so that it's at the same angle as that beveled edge was initially, and filing with slow, careful strokes across the length of the cutting edge there until she gets those nicks and irregularities out of it, gets that blade sharpened back up. And when she's through, you can see bright, shiny metal on there. It looks pretty good. And a good sharp blade, I don't care if it's on a hoe or whether it's on an axe or if it's on a shovel, will always cut much more efficiently, more cleanly, and it's less tiring to use than a dull one is. Any cutting tool that has a beveled edge can be sharpened to improve its performance. We didn't sharpen this one, but you can see in this example, just a pair of hand pruners, but you can see the beveled edge right there. There's the beveled edge, and like the hedge clippers, it only has one sharp edge to it. The other blade is flat, and these things, they cut like scissors. It pulls, it pinches or squeezes whatever you're cutting in between the jaws of the two blades, and as it slides across this flat section here, it clips off whatever it is you're cutting, whether it's young stems off of a small shrub, or some bigger small, or some larger diameter, pencil sized diameter tree limbs, etc. But a sharp blade will always cut much more efficiently and easier. Makes a cleaner cut, just a lot simpler, easier to use in the long run. We're getting down close to the end of this. I do want to thank our tool lady today that helped us out. Appreciate Miss Kathy Lou Moat. I am privileged to call her my wife, and I appreciate her assisting, serving as a demonstrator as we made some of the pictures that we used here in putting this little talk together today. If you keep your tools in good shape, they will last longer and work much better. So with that in mind, if you have any questions about topics related to things we talked about today or other lawn, garden, landscape topics, feel free to give me or any one of my coworkers, the other agents there at the Rutherford County Extension Service office, a call at 615-898-7710, or you can email me at mmote1@utk.edu. Well, folks, that's about all that I have for you today. I hope you found this useful, and I hope that the next time we make a presentation, you'll be able to tune in and get something of value out of it. Until next time, this is Mitchell Mote from the University of Tennessee and Tennessee State University Extension Program saying so long.